Well, this is a very interesting chapter. A lot happens, and a couple chapters in Luke are pretty long, so we'll not be able to cover everything that happens in this chapter. But let's just kind of review what's happened. So Jesus has become really popular. He's becoming increasingly popular, increasingly well-known, and now there are crowds pretty much wherever he goes. And many people are coming up to him and saying, I want to follow you, I want to be your disciple. So the chapter begins with Jesus sending out the 12 disciples. He sends them out to surrounding villages in the area, tells them to go and preach about the kingdom and heal people. So they go and they do this, and then when they return, they go to Bethsaida, which is a village in the north in Galilee. And a huge crowd follows them there. So Jesus performs a famous miracle, feeding the 5,000. Most likely this was a crowd of actually probably 10 to 15,000, because 5,000 is just the men. So it's a very large crowd that Jesus feeds. So this miracle, this famous miracle. And then after this, Jesus spends some time with his disciples. He takes Peter, James, and John. They go up to the mountain to pray, and this dramatic scene called the Transfiguration takes place. Moses and Elijah appear, and they're talking with Jesus, and his voice says, "This is my son, whom I have chosen. Listen to him." So after this happens, they come down from the mountain, and they meet this large crowd, and Jesus heals this demon-possessed boy. And then they start their journey toward Jerusalem, and Jesus sends some messengers ahead of him. And the chapter ends with a few interactions Jesus had with some people that are wanting to be his disciples. So this is a great chapter, and it marks a shift for Jesus' ministry. And everything that happens in this chapter, if you see it the right way, it's all related. It might look like it's just kind of a bunch of random stories that are happening, but everything's related here. And the key to understanding this, I think, is in verse 51, near the end. When Jesus says, as the time drew near for him to ascend to heaven, Jesus resolutely set out for Jerusalem. In another translation, it reads, he set his face to go to Jerusalem. So Jesus has his sight set on Jerusalem. That's where he's going. He knows his mission. He knows what he's supposed to do. And in this chapter, he determines that he's going to start this journey now. Now's the time. I'm going to start this journey towards Jerusalem. And he knows what this means for him. He knows what's waiting for him in Jerusalem. That he will be killed. That he will be crucified. Twice in this chapter, he tells his disciples this. He tells them, I'm going to Jerusalem, I'm going to be betrayed. I'm going to be turned over to the leaders of the religious law, and I'm going to be killed. Twice he tells them that. And then in the Transfiguration, this kind of meeting of the minds with Moses and Elijah and Jesus, again, they're talking about this mission that Jesus has to go to Jerusalem and die. So this chapter is all centered around that. And you can tell by the way Jesus is interacting with his disciples that this is what is on his mind. This is what he's thinking about. He's thinking about the fact that he's going to die soon. So the first thing Jesus does is he trains his disciples to do ministry. He sends them out to the villages to reach people. And notice something very interesting about this. He specifically instructs them not to take anything with them. He tells them, don't take anything. Don't take any bread, money, clothes, no bag. Why? Why does he do that? Why does he tell them to not bring anything with them? What he's telling them is that this message that he's been preaching, this gospel that he's been teaching people, only works if you depend entirely on it. It only works if you're all in. It only works when you put yourself in the position that if it doesn't work, you'll fail. So don't have any backup plans. Don't take any money or clothes, anything that you can rest on in case it doesn't work out. Right? Trust me, what he's saying. Trust me. Trust what I've been telling you. That's where the power comes from. We have taken this to heart here at the Rubicon. We talked about this verse when we first planted this church. One of our core values here is simplicity. And it's not that simplicity has any value in and of itself. It's just that we believe that simplicity serves us because it helps us keep our focus on the gospel. We believe that the gospel is the only way for us to relate to God. And so we purposely pass on some of the extras, keep things simple, for various reasons, but primarily because we believe they are necessary. And we like to keep our focus just on the gospel, if we can. So, the disciples return from preaching in all these villages, and a huge crowd gathers. And the disciples think they should send them away, because it's late. They're going to be hungry. They're going to need places to live. It's a huge crowd, 10,000, 15,000 people. They're in a remote area. There's nothing around. It's late in the afternoon. So they want to turn them away, send them to the surrounding villages. They better start moving. So Jesus tells them, you feed them. So here this crowd has followed Jesus, and they're in this remote place. There's no food, there's no lodging, and the disciples are worried. What does this teach us? Jesus does this miracle here, feeds the 5,000. What does this teach us? I think simply Jesus is saying, trust me. I will provide your needs. I can provide your needs, even when you don't think I can. I can. I can provide your needs. It's nothing for me. I want to. This crowd has followed Jesus with no food, no plan, and it's getting late. And I think Jesus is just moved by their recklessness, frankly. They don't have a plan. They just came to see Jesus. I think it touches him. He just finished sending out his disciples, telling them, you don't need to bring anything with you. And now here he demonstrates that. You don't need to bring food. You don't need to bring anything with you. I can provide all your needs. He does this miracle. Turns these loaves and fishes and feeds 10,000 people with leftovers. So after this, Jesus talks to the disciples privately. And he asks them an important question. The next thing that happens, he says he's alone praying, and he comes to the disciples. Who do the crowds say I am? What do the people say I am? And then he asks them more directly, who do you say I am? And that's an important question for the disciples to answer. At this point in particular, who am I? Who am I to you? Jesus is probing his disciples. He's preparing them for what comes next. And the main theme of the rest of this chapter, and what I want to focus on, is the cost of following Jesus. Twice in this chapter, Jesus predicts his death. They're heading to Jerusalem now, and Jesus knows he's going to die. And he starts warning his disciples that there's a cost to following him. He's telling his disciples, I'm heading towards the cross in Jerusalem. That's what's waiting for me there. And if you follow me, that's what's waiting for you. That's where I'm going. And if you want to follow me, that's where I'm going. Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross daily and follow me. See, the disciples have expectations for what will happen when they get to Jerusalem. You can tell, even in this chapter, that they do, because in verse 46, they're arguing about which of them will be the greatest. They are expecting Jesus to take over when they get to Jerusalem. He's the new king. He's going to take over Jerusalem, take over power, and then he's going to put us in as rulers, and I'm going to be top dog. They're fighting over position amongst themselves. Who's going to be one of Jesus' right-hand man? But Jesus knows what's waiting for him. What actually is waiting for him is not the kind of glory that the disciples are expecting. He's thinking about the cross. He's contemplating the cross that he has to bear. He's instructing his disciples to do the same. Think about where I'm going. I'm warning you. It's not what you think. It might not look the way you think. He's instructing us as well to do the same. The cross is something we must all consider when thinking about our commitment to Jesus. To follow Jesus is to follow him to the cross, where he goes, which means surrendering things to him. Surrendering dreams, expectations, fears, hopes. It may mean suffering. It may mean hardship. It might mean sacrifice. And Jesus instructs us to consider that ahead of time. And the first aspect of considering it is answering the question Jesus asks, who do you say I am? Who is Jesus? A good teacher? Wise man? Somebody worthy of respect? An idea? A concept? Or is he something more than that? Is he the singular purpose of your life? Is he an advisor? Helps you out? Or is he a king? And you can tell if he's just an advisor by the way you respond when you don't like the advice. Right? That's how we know if we think Jesus is our advisor. How do we take his advice always? I used to treat Jesus like that. Like an advisor. I approached him like an advisor. Someone just to help me. But he won't be treated that way. He refuses to be treated that way. He won't let us treat him that way. There's no place for him. No place in our lives for him as just an advisor. Only as a ruler. I remember one time I was rebelling against God. I knew he wanted me to do something. I didn't want to do it. I was resisting him. And frankly, I was pretty nonchalant about it. I just didn't want to do it. And I was kind of like, well, it'll be fine. And he spoke to me. And he said, simply, obey me. And he had never spoken to me like that before. He had never been that stern before to me. That just obey me. And I was surprised, very surprised, that he would speak to me like that. Because he wasn't my ruler. He was just the advisor. The happy ending is that story is that I did obey him eventually. There's no relationship with Jesus to have except one where he is Lord and we are not. That's the relationship. And we see this kind of all or nothing aspect of the gospel when Jesus sends out his disciples. Depend entirely on the gospel, nothing else. That's the only way it works. It only works that way. There's no other way. See, if Jesus isn't our king, if he's not our savior, if he's not everything, then we won't be willing to follow him if it means difficulty. And I think Jesus realized that a lot of people that are with him are like that. They will abandon him when things get hard, and we see that as we read through Luke. But that's exactly what happens. And Jesus is warning them now that things will get hard. So think about who I am to you, what I really mean to you. Consider it. Another important aspect we see in this chapter has to do with expectations. Like the disciples had expectations for what will happen in Jerusalem, we have expectations for what it will mean to follow Jesus. And we need to examine them. We need to examine our expectations. At the end of the chapter, Jesus turns away several people. We read this, who want to follow him. He turns away 3 different people. The first person Jesus turns away says he will follow Jesus wherever he goes. But Jesus says to him, foxes have dens and birds have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. This man likely has an expectation of what it'll be like to follow Jesus. He's kind of got this idea in his head what it'll be like. This guy is awesome. I'm going to follow him. And Jesus challenges him. He says, it won't be like what you think. It's not the glory that you think. So let's be aware of our expectations. We all have them. We expect things to be a certain way when we follow Jesus. But Jesus is warning us that it's a narrow road. It's a difficult thing to follow him. And he's pretty explicit, right? He's not mincing words. He says, Nathan said this morning, in this life you will have troubles. Take heart, I have overcome the world. In this world you will have troubles. He's guaranteeing them. But I think when it actually happens, it surprises us. And it makes us angry. Or it does for me. When our expectations on God are not met. When we're disappointed with God. He doesn't come through in the way we think he should. And then we get angry. I do. Surprised, angry. That's because I have expectations that I shouldn't. So look at the last 2 people that Jesus asked to follow him. They say, Lord, let me first return home and bury my father. And yes, Lord, I'll follow you, but first let me say goodbye to my family. And Jesus turns them away. Why? Because their priorities are out of order. You might say, what's wrong with caring about your family? What's wrong with wanting to bury your father? Just it's a side note here. Most likely, most people say that it's not like this guy's dad had just died and he needs to go to the funeral. It's probably like he needs to go home and wait for his dad to die before following Jesus. Just some information. But the point is, there's nothing wrong with caring for your family. That's the point. There's nothing wrong with that. But the first and second commandments, the 10 commandments in the Old Testament, when Moses gets the 10 commandments from Mount Sinai, give them to the people of Israel. The first and second ones are to put God first and then make no idols. And an idol is anything that takes priority over God. And naturally, we're all idol worshipers. It's in our very nature. We don't have images, but we worship idols. We do it automatically, and it's so common that we probably aren't even aware that we're doing it. It's so intrinsic to our lives that we do it all the time, effortlessly. So if Jesus isn't our top priority, something else automatically is. And inevitably, it becomes an idol. And so to face the cross, to pay the cost of following Jesus, to lay down our lives means giving up our idols a lot of the time. And idols are a tricky thing. Tim Keller has this great idea that he says that idols are simply good things turned into ultimate things. So money, comfort, a relationship, a career, a dream, a goal, any of those good things prioritized over God is an idol. And at some point, a decision will come that will test your priorities. Inevitably, this will happen. So choosing Jesus in a situation will mean losing a relationship, or forfeiting money, or comfort, or security, or happiness in some way. And it's in those moments that it will be revealed to us the order of things in our hearts, and really what's ultimate in our lives. And the only way to have Jesus is to have him completely. He's either first in your life or nothing. And eventually it will come to that. Your priorities will be tested. And because he loves you, he will arrange for them to be tested. You will face a choice between him and whatever else is important to you. Be prepared for it. Don't be surprised by it. Don't be surprised if it happens. Consider the cost. Consider what it may cost you to follow Jesus. Everything else will have to take a back seat. That's the deal. And the last interaction that Jesus has in the end of this chapter, he gives a warning about putting your hand to the plow and looking back. Anyone who puts his hand to the plow and looks back is not fit. We are to count the cost beforehand so that we are not surprised later when we find out that our hearts and our desires are in conflict with the purposes of the one we are following. It will happen. And Jesus tells his disciples often, and in this chapter, that he will be rejected and face death. He tells them this all the time. He does it again in this chapter, and he warns us that we will too. It will feel like death when Jesus tells us to turn the other cheek in some situation, to let somebody off the hook. And we don't want to. We will face disappointment. And a time will come when our expectations of God are not met, and it will feel like death when Jesus says to us, "Blessed are those who are not offended because of me," like he says to John the Baptist a few chapters earlier. When he's sitting in jail, Jesus is out there ministering. Things will come to a head and our priorities will come into question, and it'll force us to decide whether Jesus really is what's most important to us or something else is. And it'll feel like death to surrender that to God. Jesus promises us life. He promises us life, guarantees it. That's the good news of the gospel. Life, true life, joy, promised, secured. But he warns us that the road to life, this kind of life, will feel like death sometimes. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will save it. To lose our life for Jesus is to follow him to the cross. And we must come to terms with that. We cannot come to Jesus without coming to terms with the cross. It's our great hope in that it has made possible a relationship with God. But at the same time, it's our great fear because it means death. And so we resist the very thing that can save us. We hold back. We hang on to our lives, afraid that we won't like what happens to us if Jesus is in control. But Jesus says in no uncertain terms, if you try to keep your life, you'll lose it. But if you give it up for me, you'll find it. True life. So the truth is, death is a certainty for all of us, right? I mean, we're all going to die. Whether we choose to follow Jesus or not, we're going to lose everything. Can't take anything with us. Whether we make him the top priority or not, we're still going to lose whatever is our top priority. And whether we lay our lives down or not, we will lose them eventually. So what's the alternative to laying down our lives for Jesus? The alternative is trying to create the life we want for ourselves. And that's what we do all the time. And has that ever worked for anyone? I mean, think about the people who have the greatest ability to fashion whatever life they want. Think about those people. People who are rich, celebrities. Aren't those some of the most miserable people there are? I mean, the richest people I can think of do not strike me as particularly happy, honestly. They don't necessarily have anything that I want. But we want to be in charge still. We want to write our own stories. We want to determine what our lives will be like, who we are and what we do. We want to decide those things. And I think, at least in part, we do this because of our insecurities. We hide our nakedness, like Adam and Eve did in the garden. We cover our wounds and we build walls around our pain. And what we really need to do is uproot the whole system. Our hearts hurt, so we shield them, protect ourselves. But what we really need is surgery. You know, we're deceived into thinking we can have these lives that we want, that we can create the life we want, that we can arrange the life we want, that we have the ability to do this. That's part of the blessings of the poor. Jesus said, "Blessed are the poor." They are not so easily deceived as those of us who have options in life, to think that we can arrange the life we want. John Eldridge has this great book, The Journey of Desire. I love that book. If you never read John Eldridge, this is a great book. So in it, he says this about kind of arranging your life. It can't be done. No matter how hard we try, no matter how clever our plan, we cannot arrange for the life we desire. Set the book down for a moment and ask yourself this question. Will life ever be what I so deeply want it to be in a way that cannot be lost? This is the second lesson we must learn, and in many ways the hardest to accept. We must have life, but we cannot arrange for it. People will avoid this lesson all their days, changing their plans, their jobs, even their mates, rather than facing the truth. Don't you see the good news in this? It means we don't have to strive, to fight, to kick, scream, and worry to try to find the life we desperately want, that we need. We can lay it all down. We can just give all that up. We can trust Jesus to meet those needs. We can give up the planning and the strategizing and worry only about one thing, following Jesus. It's like the feeding of the 5,000 in this chapter. Jesus is saying, trust me to meet your needs. I can meet your needs. Trust me to do it. So a lot of you know Brittany and I, and a lot of you know our story, and you've heard it a million times because I tell it all the time, because I love telling our story. It's amazing and awesome. But you're going to have to hear it one more time because I love telling it. So, this is a little different take on it, though. So if you've heard it already, you can still listen. So for a long time, more than anything, I wanted to be married. That was like the only goal of my life. I wanted it more than anything. And to be frank, I really wanted it more than I wanted God. I really wanted to use God to get marriage. That's really what I wanted. That's me being honest. It was a huge issue, too, for me as I was working out my relationship with God, because I would go to God and try to get what I wanted, and if I couldn't get what I wanted, or felt like he wasn't giving me what I wanted, I would go around God and try to get what I wanted. And so that led to unhealthy dating relationships. Because I wanted marriage, I wanted to be with someone. So a lot of this desire was born out of my own insecurities. There's nothing wrong with wanting to be married. It's a good thing, but it was an idol for me. I wanted a guarantee from God that he would let me get married. I had expectations for what my life would be like, and in that was me being married. But no matter how much I asked him, he would never give me a guarantee. He refused to give me the guarantee. Eventually, God prompted me to pursue Brittany. But even then, I didn't actually believe we would get married. I still kind of was like, oh, this is just a test or something. I never thought we would get married. And I thought God was just working on my rejection issues, which Brittany helped me greatly in dealing with rejection. He did do that, but to my amazement and infinite delight, Brittany and I did eventually get married. The point is, I spent so much time worrying about whether God would meet my needs. I spent so much time worrying about whether I would be happy, whether he would let me be happy and be married. And I would go around God because I wanted to write my own story, because I thought I couldn't trust him to write my story. It never worked. It only made me miserable. It made me miserable. I was trying to save my life. To save my life. And if God hadn't intervened, I would have lost it. I really would have. And the irony is, the whole time I'm fighting God, who had a much better story in mind than I could write. One that required sacrifice, but one that resulted in more joy than I would ever have dreamed of. Paul says we are united with Christ in his death, his burial, and resurrection. That's what the act of baptism demonstrates. Colossians says, you were buried with Christ when you were baptized, lowered into the water. And with him you were raised to new life because you trusted the mighty power of God who raised Christ from the dead. So while we, like Christ, have to face death in that way, we have to give up our lives, we have a great hope. We are promised resurrection. We are promised life, true life, lasting joy, all made possible because of Jesus. There's a great verse I love in Hebrews. It's called, for the joy set before him, he endured the cross. Jesus could endure the cross because he saw what was on the other side of it. He saw the joy that was waiting for him. He saw the joy that would result from his death. And the hope of the gospel lies on the other side of the cross. It's by laying down our lives, carrying our cross, following Jesus, that we find life. Our hope is not that we can find the life we want now necessarily. I hope you can, but that's not our hope. The hope is that the life we want is already waiting for us. It's already secure because of Jesus, guaranteed. Whether we have a taste of it in this world, which we often do, but it's guaranteed for us. It's no jeopardizing it. But to find it, we have to be willing to follow Jesus to the cross, to be united with him in death. We cannot arrange for the life we want. To follow Christ is to give up that dream that is really a delusion. That we can arrange our own little heaven on earth. Jesus promises us to follow him is to shoulder a cross and surrender our lives. And we have to come to terms with that. So I want to close by saying two things. First, there's a cost to following Jesus, and the cost is high. In fact, it's everything. Cost is everything. Whatever you hold most dear, you'll be tested on that. Guaranteed. That will be your cost. And secondly, and most importantly, Jesus is worth whatever cost you have to pay. That despite there being a cost to you, Jesus has paid a much greater cost to himself in order to make a place for you in the kingdom, in order to purchase your future. And whatever it costs you, I guarantee you will never regret paying it. And ultimately, you can't keep it anyway. And it's worth it because you get Jesus. And we're all here because we believe that. That whatever cost we must pay is worth it because we get Jesus. He leads us to the cross and ultimately to life itself. Everlasting life. Unimaginable joy. The promise of Jesus. If you lay down your life for him, you'll find the joy in this world that is in this world so often unattainable and always unsustainable. It's true. Whatever cost we pay will not compare to what God has planned for us. Lastly, let me say this. The truth is, we'll read later in Luke, that when Jesus arrives in Jerusalem, he's arrested, tried, and he goes to the cross. But when he goes to the cross, he goes alone. He is abandoned by all his followers. Everyone who told him they would be with him and go wherever he goes, be with him to the end, never abandon him or betray him. They all abandon him in the end. They all leave him. And we've all done that. I have done that. We've abandoned Jesus. We didn't choose him. We chose to save ourselves. But the good news of the gospel is that Jesus still went. He still went to Jerusalem. He still faced the cross. He did what we couldn't do. He went in our place. And now he's given us the power of the cross. He's purchased it for us. He has given us life. And now, because of what Jesus has done, we can face the cross too. Not in fear, but in wonder of what he has done. Of what he's done for us. Not to save ourselves, but to lay our lives down for others, like Jesus did for us. It's only because he went to the cross that we're able to do this. I'll give you this one verse in 1 Corinthians, an awesome verse. Think about the promise of God, the promise that Jesus is making. The way to find life, the only way is to lay down your lives. But you remember what he's offering to us. Everything belongs to you. The whole world and life and death. The present and the future. Everything belongs to you. And you belong to Christ. Let's pray. Lord, thank you for your word. Thank you for what you've done on the cross for us. Thank you for what you've accomplished. That you've made a way for us to have a relationship with you. For us to be with you. For us to have the life we want. You've made it possible. Because you endured the cross. God, and so we will follow you. Wherever you go, we will follow you. Help us to count the cost. Help us to consider who you are to us. Help us to think about your promise and what you have promised us, life everlasting. So that whatever we must pay, we can pay it gladly, knowing that you will give us life. You will give us what we want. And ultimately, you are the only source for what we need. We love you, Lord. Thank you for what you're doing. We pray that you just bless everyone here today. In Jesus' name.